Now, the floods that ravaged KwaZulu-Natal in early April destroyed thousands of homes and displaced an estimated 40,000 people, further exacerbating the country's acute housing crisis. As extreme weather events become more common in a changing climate, even more people are at risk of displacement. Now, let's discuss this further. We're now joined via Zoom by Professor Amira Osman, a Professor of Architecture at the Tshwane University of Technology. Prof, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Prof, there is no doubt that we are sitting with a crisis. Now, currently, we understand there are more than 740,000 people in KZN alone who are still waiting for RDP homes, and the situation has been made worse by the flooding. Should government urgently rethink its approach to housing at this stage?
Absolutely, Onati. Thank you so much for that. I'm actually sitting in my hotel room in Spain, where we have just concluded a conference on affordable housing activation. And the conference theme was removing barriers to affordable housing. And what I said in the opening session of the conference was that I believe that the housing crisis is a global crisis. Someone many years ago said that as far as housing is concerned, the whole world has remained underdeveloped. However, in South Africa, we have very specific challenges that are context-specific, related to the historical realities, related to the spatial realities and disadvantage of our cities. And I truly believe that we need to address this urgently. You're right, the climate change issue is going to mean that we're going to have these events happening several times a year, when previously they would happen every so many years. And so we need an urgent intervention. We need to urgently rethink our housing programs. And one thing that I keep saying at these international forums is that I'm hoping that South Africa will step up and be a pioneer in this process.
I mean, at this rate, and we're just talking about KZN, it will take eThekwini some 100 years to clear the backlog. Prof, so the conversation then starts to look at practical solutions government can then look into. I mean, one of the things that you said in your conference, themed removing barriers to affordable housing. From a practical perspective, if government had to look at that as a possible, challenge and question, how would they start moving to remove those barriers and making sure that people get the houses, but also decent housing? As we've seen with KZN, some of those houses were not even properly built.
Absolutely. And I think on this very same channel and at various forums over the years, I have made the point that the backlog will not go down. Many years ago as well, someone said the more successful a government's housing program is, the more the demand, which just means that we need to have a completely new strategy to how we use housing funding, how we deliver services, how we install infrastructure, and just the whole subsidy system needs to be reconsidered. We need mixed use, higher density, well-located settlements with job opportunities incorporated, with all the services that go towards making viable and beautiful and safe neighborhoods included. If we don't do that and we continue to have poorly located, isolated, easy to recognize housing for the poor, they will continue to be vulnerable to these kind of events. So the benefit, addressing climate change is something that, it will benefit all society, but addressing the most vulnerable in our societies, addressing their needs first, will make sure that we function properly as a complete and integrated society, and our cities will function better.
Not to move too much away from, KZN, just a recent study by the South African Cities Network, releasing just statistics in terms of where people are placed and where they move to, saying that about 1 in 5 people in some of the country's biggest cities, including Johannesburg and Cape Town, live in informal settlements. Of the 9 municipalities under the microscope, the Nelson Mandela Bay had the smallest percentage of people in informal housing. How important is it, in in this attempt of finding the solutions of building affordable housing, decent housing for South Africans, to collaborate, not only just government, but also, corporates and big business?
Absolutely. The private sector needs to become involved. We need to put in place incentives for their involvement. We need to also work very closely with civil society. And I actually believe that we need to work with informality. Whatever systems we put in place must ensure that we respect informal processes. The reality is informal processes are able to cater for the needs that formal systems have, to fill in that gap where formal systems have failed us. So where people go and live, where they occupy buildings in a city, where they decide to settle is an excellent indicator of where affordable housing needs to be located. This constant friction with informality needs to stop. We need to have in place systems that respect those forces and systems that allow for formal and informal processes to work together.
There's also, of course, as we begin to look at housing issues, other problems that government is facing. Just, talk to us about ways in which, for instance, government can go about to try and stop buildings, as an example, from being hijacked and slumlording in the inner city, to make sure that these buildings then go to the use that is required, that is necessary.
Absolutely. How about directing subsidies to those buildings in the inner city that are very dilapidated, that can be upgraded, keeping people in those buildings and directing subsidies there? There's a lot of buildings in inner city Johannesburg that are excellent opportunities for providing that type of housing, working with communities, keeping them there as far as possible, relocating only when we absolutely have to, but directing funding towards improving the situations in those buildings and retaining those communities and community structures that are very valuable, that have already been set up there. But you're right also in that there's hijackers, there's people benefiting from this situation, and we need to find a way to address this issue.
Professor, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. All right.
Thank you so much.
Professor Amira Osman, Professor of Architecture at Tshwane University of Technology.